I'm dreaming of sleeping next to you. I'm feeling like a lost little boy in a brand new town.
So, what
I'm
I
falling
thought I would
asleep
do for
and then
this
each
sort of
morning passes is
final
another dream
talk
to
before
ashes and they
we
all
break is to
fall
look at
down.
intuition, because it seems to me that this is one of the very
And as I
misunderstood,
lay me
poorly
down,
defined aspects of the work that we do. And when I say we, I mean kind of everyone, like kind of everyone. Obviously, I was speaking to coaches and healers and practitioners and stuff here, but I know too that when I'm speaking to my friends who are like teachers, and when I speak to my friends who are doing more artistic endeavors and stuff like that, they all speak to their version of intuition, right? You know, my teachers will talk about how they just get a sense of what's going on in the classroom, or like a kid will walk in the morning and they'll notice something, and it's not something that they can describe, right? It's not because the kid is disheveled, it's not because they're crying, it's not because of anything, but they get just a sense that there is something that they need to pay attention to, and there is no other word for that except an intuitive response to what's going on. And so I think that in every aspect of life, I can't think of a profession um, or a role as a human being where intuition doesn't play a really, really significant part of it. And therefore, if we have a deeper understanding of it, it's obviously going to lend to some sort of benefit. So it's a really vague topic, and I could have approached it, 100 different ways. But what I decided that I really wanted to do was look at it through the lenses that I have found most helpful in terms of being a coach, and then really put it out there to you guys. I would love it if we could exchange some stories around like the type of intuitive experiences that you've had. And I know every one of you has had them. And then kind of do an exploration a little bit of the sense that we make of it. So let me start by saying that I actually made a slideshow for tonight as well, because there's just so many different definitions of intuition. So I think that the place to start is to understand that there is no distinction between head, heart, body. You know, we came to this sort of understanding that there is a body and there is a mind, and then we talk about like mind body medicine, and we make lots of connotations to these different areas. And of course there's chakras and there's all these different ways of sort of referring to these different things, but there's no demarcation line, right? Like nobody can really point out to me, nobody has anyway, convincingly, exactly where it is that the mind ends and the body begins, right? And so whenever we're speaking in these terms, I think it's really useful to start out just as a baseline that what we're talking about is a whole system. And the whole system works effectively when the different parts, of course, are being addressed in certain ways. And so I just read a really interesting study in terms of intuition that kind of embodies this, brings it together in a certain way. There was a group of people who were in different countries, different schools, different levels of education, different cultural identities, different ethnic and ethnical backgrounds. And they were all brought together in different areas of the world, and they were given a blank map of the body. And so they were each given the instruction, all they wanted them to do was to take this map of, and then on this map of the body, they listed 100 different feelings. So these weren't emotions necessarily, but these were 100 feelings. So they were feelings like exhaustion, hunger, sadness, depression. So they were definitely, or things like togetherness, belonging, stuff like that. And so these 100 feelings that they had, they asked each of them to place them somewhere in the body. And what was so interesting about it is that there were some obvious similarities, right? Like most people said, placed hunger in the stomach, right? Which kind of makes sense. I think that's fairly, easy to understand and pragmatic. But it was interesting that most people also put like togetherness in the heart area. And most people put things like regulation, discipline, actually in the hands. And most people put exhaustion all over the body. There was a way that they were able to indicate a certain area or a sort of a spreading. Exhaustion went all through the body. There were words like depression that always were below the heart area. And then there were things like anxiety that were always always above the gut. There was like these ranges that they found. And so the reason why they did this is that it was so clear at the end of it that there is an embodied mind, right? That even though these are concepts and ideas that we can explain away with conditioning and all that kind of stuff, because they sort of erased all of those influences, there is this sense that we do have a sense of ourself. Where is it from? I can send you the link. I picked it up first on a Malcolm Gladwell, the Revolutionist History is where I first picked it up, and then I found the actual study somewhere. But our brain includes the entire body. And so I think when we talk about intuition, we always have to remember that we're talking about this very embodied experience of our brain. And so vibrations, the idea that our brain is like a computer and that the information that is being fed to us is coming through this sort of like computerized mechanism, of course we know isn't true, but we also don't have a very good explanation of what it is if it's not that. And so even when we're talking about like healing and we're talking about energy and that sort of thing, very often we have a lack of words that are actually able to give us any sort of directive experience to what it would be like to actually identify intuition and then express it in a way where it's going to be specific to what you're trying to accomplish. So our brains and our bodies are coordinate together, right, to create emotions. So very often what's happening is that people are experiencing something that's happening in the body, and then they need to give a word to it. And so the word that they have to find to explain it will come out like an emotion, right? So it's very, very possible that it could be something like our system is off and we're dehydrated, say. But if we don't know that we're dehydrated, it's going to start making us feel potentially like off balance, or it's going to make us feel a little bit like low in our mood. And if we don't know, like say we had some, like it just like was absent from our experience that we were dehydrated, and instead we tried to describe what we were feeling, it's likely to come out as an emotion, right? Is it likely to come out as like, I'm not feeling good. And then we kind of default into that having some sort of meaning behind it. And we're going to try and attribute it to something. And if we figure it out, as we often do, right, we realize that like, oh, we're not actually depressed, we're low in iron, right? We can't make the body feel energetic if it's got some aspect to it that isn't working properly, obviously. So we're sort of in like 101 in terms of the system working. But this is all, I'm just sort of laying the ground here in terms of intuition. This is all really, really, really important to remember when we're trying to figure out what it is that we're picking up that is not the data that we can actually point at and say, this is why I picked it up and interpret it this way. What we're noticing is that, you know how easy it is to understand that energetically, we all have an aura, right? Scientifically now we know that every human being has an aura around them, is sort of like egg-shaped, energetic, colorful thing that is around the body. And we can actually measure this. We have instruments now that can detect aura and pick it up. And we also know that there's a vibrational shift, right? Most of you have heard me talk about this, the space around you. You know, it's sort of somewhere in the range of about 10 feet around. It could be all the way up to about 20 feet for some people, and it could be as little as 8 feet for other people, but somewhere in that range of like 8 to 20 feet around a human being, you have a vibrational response. So the actual molecules in the air are vibrating because of the thoughts that you're having, the movements you're making, the sweat you're sweating, the way that your blood is pulsing, everything about your beingness is affecting the energy. And we are so lacking in understanding about this energy that it's easy to dismiss. Again, not in this group necessarily, but in the larger world out there, it certainly is, which is interesting because we know that vibrationally, we don't question that music is changing the vibrations between the source of the music or the sound and our ears, right? Like nobody doubts that. Nobody gets all skeptical about like, are you sure? Like, are you sure sound vibrates? Because there's no other explanation. There's no reason otherwise why something invisible can be heard. And so it's like this forced acceptance that people have to have an explanation. Oh, okay, the vibration, that all affects how we're going to have our eardrums receive the sound and we can make sense of it. And then you move to the exact same thing, right? We also have this energy around us, and it's too difficult for people to accept because they don't have any words for it. They don't have like a receptor. There isn't an eardrum that they can basically say, this is the proof, right? The proof that sound makes air vibrate is our eardrums say so. But the proof that when you walk into a room and you are in a super, super crappy place, the fact that that hits my body and it causes my body to have this energy shift that gives me a sense that something's not okay. Well, that we don't know what to say or do about that, right? That's got to be something else. You're picking up on some other facet, right? You must actually be, there's some like unconscious thing that you're picking up on, like maybe their face is slightly different than it was, no, probably not. Probably not. There's probably some people that are excellent at keeping their face exactly the same, right? There are definitely people who are going to show in some ways, but there are people who absolutely don't. Look at the extraordinary actors in the world, right? And so the idea that what we're doing is we're picking up something that is unexplainable. It's coming to us in some different form. Yeah, exactly. There are a lot of people that really genuinely do have poker faces. Talk to the people who do deceit detection, right? There are people who like under the closest of close-up cameras, when they slow it down and they watch everything about their face, nothing changes. Absolute poker face, right? You see, if you I doubt many of you do this, but if you ever find that that channel on your television where they actually show poker games and they get right up in people's faces, like it is true that some people can do this, right? So the common explanation, of course, is that we're picking up on these nuanced things. But I think the reality is, of course, what we're picking up on is something that is energetic. And that experience tends to be what I would refer to as an intuitive response. Now, here's the thing. We know that when air vibrates, it goes into our eardrum and we call it sound. We know that when there's, little filters of light and they come through our eyeballs and we call it vision. And we know that there is touch, right? We know that like when matter hits matter, there is this experience of tactile touch. But what we don't know how to do is to explain basically anything beyond those five senses with any decent sort of explanation other than these really, really, really like outside attempts to scientifically demonstrate, again, like I referred to, like the aura, we can actually demonstrate that, the vibrational field, but we don't have any measurement of what that actually means, right? So with sound, we can turn up a dial and make the volume higher. And we know how to do that, right? Like we know how to actually manipulate and make sense of what the energy, the vibrational experience is doing, and we can control it basically. But we don't actually know that like when somebody happens to have like a really red aura, there is no information. There are definitely people who can give you like anecdotal information, but we don't actually have like a sound reasonable kind of interpretation of what this stuff that we can now measure actually means, right? And we also know that vibrational fields are balanced to the person, right? So one person who may make, the vibrational frequencies around them, do this, for them, it happened. If you do relate it back to their experience, it means that they're like energetic. If somebody else vibrates at the exact same frequency, for them, it may mean that they're super content and calm, right? So there isn't a sort of a universal way. We can't say that this is like a 440, right? 440 vibrations per second means it's going to make this tune and that, or this sound, this tone. And so because we're missing all of that information, we've kind of defaulted into this intuition, which everybody has their own interpretation of. So I just want to share with you here the understanding that comes when you Google it. Okay. Slideshow. My daughter just showed me how to do this. Okay. Trust your intuition. So here's the definitions. Intuition is using information and making judgments based on skills, rules, and knowledge without conscious awareness. We're going to talk about this one in a second. That this, of course, is one version of intuition, not the one we were just talking about. Scientific and popular literature span bodily reactions, feelings, pattern matching, spiritual insight, and even ESP. I guess that was written in like before. Intuition represents data processed faster than the mind to comprehend. That's terrible grammar, but you get the point. So this idea that it's data processing faster than the mind can comprehend is the most, I have now discovered, is the most common agreed upon interpretation of intuition. So that's what I was saying before. Everybody wants to believe that it's regular old stuff that our five senses can pick up and that our brain as a computer can process. It just happens faster. Then there are these, nature is the silent witness to intuition, and without nature, we cannot revive our intuition. I'll tell you in a moment why I have this one here. No, I'll tell you right now. It's because anyone who actually has learned to use intuition in a really, really deep way, almost 100% of them say it's easier for them when they are actually in connection with nature. Intuition is when you have a keen sense of feely-feels that feel feely, and you feel like you know things that you don't know, but you do know because you're feeling them. This is my personal favorite. It's also Catherine's favorite. I know it is. A keen sense of the feely-feels that feel feely. And you feel like you know things that you don't know, but you do know because you're feeling them. God bless. Okay. Intuition is knowing without thinking. Albert Einstein, of course, always, as you know, no matter what topic I'm looking up, I look for his perspective on it, and he always nails it. He doesn't go anywhere near that sort of like scientific explanation of like, oh, it's just this fast processing. He's like, no, man, it's like straight up magic. Follow your instincts. That's where your true wisdom manifests itself. That's Oprah. This, to me, unfortunately, I think, is a ghastly misinterpretation of intuition. So I bring this one up because I feel like there are so many misunderstandings. And as coaches, we are in the business of teaching people to trust themselves. And so essentially what we're doing, really, all of us could call ourselves like teachers of intuition because it's really kind of what we're doing. And when we do it wrong, we can, potentially influence someone in a way that is not for their best well-being. And this is a mistake. I'm willing to say it here loud. Sorry, Oprah, but following your instincts is a real, instincts are instincts. Instincts are meant to keep us alive. Instincts are meant to drive us toward the things that we needed. And they are definitely more in line with evolution than they are with what we're trying to do here. And so I think it is quite true to say that like it is very instinctual sometimes for people to, get violent. And that's probably not really where true wisdom manifests. And it is very instinctual. And I hate to say this, but it is true that it's very instinctual sometimes for people to impose themselves sexually on other people. it can be and feel very much like an instinct. And what we hope for is to live in a society where you're not allowed to do that, where you like have some control over that instinct that says, I want to reach out and touch this person, or I want to, and actually use the very opposite of that and say, I'm going to instead respect this person and not do what I instinctually want to do. So this one is really, really, really important, I think, to just pay attention to, and we'll talk about it a bit in a second. Intuition is the conscious experience in pure spirit of a purely spiritual. See this? Intuition is the conscious experience in pure spirit, purely spiritual content. This one I love. Again, it's terrible grammar because most of these people are not speaking English. I don't know what language this is translated from, but what it means is that it's an interpretation. It's the conscious experience of something that is pure spirit. And that, I think, is a wonderful, kind of beautiful way to start, to kind of look at it. This one, we're going to do a little exercise in a minute. Well, not in a minute, a few minutes. You know the truth by the way it feels. Now, I don't know how much intuition and truth have in common. I'm not 100% convinced that they are the same thing, because intuition, I think, is still a response to the world around us as opposed to some sort of absolute truth. But I do understand what they're trying to say here. And I think this is really important. And I put it here because we're going to do an exercise that will allow you to have the experience of what it feels like when something is absolutely true. And I'm actually going to guide you through the 4 centers of intuition. And there is definitely a difference. Sue is here, and Sue Nash does this with like muscle testing and stuff, where like if you say a true statement, then you have a strength in your system. And when you say an untrue statement, all of a sudden, just like totally weirdly, you lose strength through the system. And Sue can actually demonstrate it physically. What we're going to experience here in this exercise is that there is a way right inside your like essence of your being. There is a different feeling. And if you bring it into your daily practice of like, what does it feel like when you experience and dwell and stay in a minute with truth, in contrast to what it feels like when it may be something like uncertainty or unknowing or actual untruth, right? Like the opposite of. Oops. Oh, I can't make my slideshow go. Maybe my slideshow's over. Okay, I think it's over.
Tara, if you clicked off of your slideshow and click somewhere else accidentally, then it's no longer responding. So click on your slide, and then if there's more slides, you can click through them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's over. It's all over. It's all she wrote. Okay. Right. So, oh, hi, Simone. We're talking about intuition. All right. So with that, I would like, do I have to say anything else before we go into these? I have a very, very, very favorite way of understanding intuition. There is one thing that I do want to bring in just before we go into these 4 centers of intuition. Lisa Feldman Barrett, who you hear Alan and I both refer to fairly frequently. I love how she frames, you may have already heard this in her work, but she frames the idea that the brain's most important job is not thinking, right? We definitely have a strong tendency to believe that the brain's most important job is to give us this way of thinking through the world. But of course, it's not true. The brain's biggest job is to keep the system working, is to keep this whole thing alive, like period, right? It's the conversation we have to have with all of our clients who are trying to lose weight. When we explain to them that like your majority of your calories, like 90% of them, are used just keeping you alive, because that is hard and it requires a lot of resources. So, you can go for a run all you want, and it's fantastic for your heart and for your firmness and for your fitness and all that kind of stuff and all the exercise. But in terms of actually losing weight, You just sort of need to put less in because your body's going to use it for the activity of keeping you alive, primarily. The unconscious brain will do things that will confuse us, and it's doing it because of the system, right? So when you wake up in the morning, it's really, really important for your brain to give you a big shot of cortisol so that you have energy to wake up, like so that you can actually get out of your bed. But if you happen to be, susceptible or vulnerable to the effects of cortisol, which all of us, by the way, do when we're more stressed than an average day, we're really, really, really susceptible and vulnerable to cortisol and the feeling of cortisol. And it can tell us and make us think that we're actually anxious, that we're actually feeling this sort of like adrenaline rush of like that we associate to something's wrong, which is going to potentially kick, into your brain the like, oh, well, something feels wrong. So what is wrong? And then it goes through the index of like, well, what could be wrong? And all of a sudden you're sitting there ruminating, when really what's happening is that your body has just kicked you full of cortisol because you need to get out of bed and it needs to provide you with the energy to do that. And when you can notice that, when you can have an experience of, oh, this is maybe something that I don't need to misinterpret, this is something I can just notice, then you can avoid that whole process. Before I go into this, I also want you to think about communication. So if you think about intuition as being this like gathering of kind of everything that is outside of our five senses and our conscious awareness of things and our regular interpretation, it's a communication between us and those other parts of ourselves. So it's a communication between what we would say is like the ego, right? That the part of us, that the conscious ego that has a self-image and has, all the stuff that we associate with our external way, our way of meeting the external world. Between that and this inner part of us that is taking on so much more than what we understand. And the communication between the two tends to sort of break down in the same way communication breaks down between someone who is stressed and someone who's trying to get their point across, or someone who's not listening. And if you can sort of think about it in a way of like, well, what would you do if you had somebody that you were communicating badly with and you decided that you wanted to communicate better with them? Just about everything you apply to that situation can be applied to stepping a little bit deeper into your experience of your intuition and making sense of what is and what isn't your intuition. So the things that are not intuition is your fear, right? So fear that comes through that ego stuff. Fear of like, I'm in danger, absolutely intuition. Right? That's you picking up on all sorts of stuff that is unexplainable and that can actually save your life. But it's not the kind of fear that that's going to actually influence your thoughts. So as soon as you hear that sort of voice inside that is very critical, that is not your intuition. I think we can say that pretty definitively. Your intuition can be very, very strong and directive, but it's not critical. So there are definitely times when you may get what you would experience as an intuitive sort of direction, like a don't do that, like a firm voice of like, this is not right. But it's not going to be the voice that says, because you're stupid and incapable. That is not intuition. That is your ego. That is a whole separate thing. So I'm going to go into these four sort of ways to look at your own intuition. And then I've got a couple little exercises that we're going to do, and then I'm going to stop and put it over to you guys. So I'm referring here to a school of thinking, Atherton Drenth. Those of you who know Atherton Drenth, who is an intuitive healer, Sue knows her. And she used to be here in Guelph. She's now not, but she wrote a lot of books and she does a lot of really wonderful work. But she wrote a book, and one of the greatest things that I think that she has laid out really, really clearly, and like I say, she didn't invent this, she's just relaying information, but she has separated what we take in as intuition into these 4 things. So the first one is clairvoyance. So clairvoyance is this way of understanding intuition, a lot like the movies kind of portray. Her name is spelled Atherton, like it sounds, Atherton. The last name is Drenth, Drenth. Atherton Drenth. So clairvoyance is this idea that there are certain people who seem to be able to actually have tap into the energies that carry with them of a fractioning of light. So it's in the same way that we actually, like, through our eyes, pick up fractals of light and make sense of what we see in front of us. We also know that some of us are better at seeing that in our head and some of us are not as good, right? So I know for sure that, like, when I close my eyes, I really struggle to see things in there. So for me, even if I'm like looking at my lamp, and then if I close my eyes, I can see it, but it's not easy for me to see it. And I wouldn't bank that I'm seeing it very accurately. My husband, on the other hand, can see, he can look at something, close his eyes, and then he can describe it to me, and it's, on point, all the time. There just seems to be some capacity inside his head where when he takes visual information from the outside world and brings it in, there's an accuracy, there's an attention that his brain pays to it that my brain just doesn't. And so there's a clairvoyance, which sort of tells us that there's something. It can either be something that is seen inside the head, or it's something that is seen out, like external. But there is a type of intuition where people actually see. So there's sort of 3 versions of this. There's one where people see more than what is there. So people who see auras, right? So people who actually do describe seeing color around a person. There are people who see, like, that they'll actually see like a shift or a movement that the rest of us don't see. There's people who describe seeing, like, if you put your hand down, they'll actually see a trail. So it's like the light does something a little bit different for them as they see it come in. And those people often, very, very often, will get images of things. So those are the type of people that if you see them, they may say something like, as soon as they sat down, I just had this image of her, like, on a lake. And whatever's happening, what we're assuming is that there is a vibrational energy with the image inside the person over there is sitting there, and they're getting images in their head. And there's an energy that goes along with that. We know this. We don't understand it well enough to describe it, or certainly I don't. But we do know that it is happening all of the time. And it's as if the person sitting there, somehow, it's like having, being able to see, like, we know that there is infrared all the time, but we don't see it. Like, our eyes don't have, like, the right whatevers to see infrared, but it's there. It doesn't mean it's not there just because we can't see it, right? And it's almost as if there's some way of, like, the energy that comes from an internal visualization gets picked up by somebody who can actually pick it up. Like, it can recognize that energy and sort of sees what they see. And so that type of clairvoyance is often associated with the 6th eye, which I can't remember now what that is, but I wrote it down. And it is really, truly somebody who's likely to come across as being a very visual person, going back to, like, NLP and the VAKs, Myers-Briggs types, Enneagram, all of this stuff all together. This all plays a part in sort of how this would likely show up. There's also, though, somebody who is called a clairsentient. So the clairsentient is what we regularly refer to as empaths. So a clairsentient is someone who seems to pick up physical, like, actual feeling. So these are the people who, if they would explain to you that when their client sits down, if their client is feeling a certain way, like emotionally is feeling a certain way, they will start to mimic that feeling inside of them. So there's usually an awareness for people that it's people who are really actually clairsentient are going to notice it very, very distinctly. And they don't tend to get overly confused about whether it's theirs or somebody else's, because it's so attached to the other person. Like the person comes in and all of a sudden their stomach starts to hurt and get knotted. And then the person leaves and they don't anymore, right? It's not sympathy. It's not just thinking about somebody and being empathetic toward them. It's like, no, they're actually picking up on an energetic experience of being with that person. And of course, we're only picking up on impressions, so it can happen over the internet too, right? It can happen over Zoom. You could be with somebody because they're picking up the impression of what it is that you're feeling, whether it's like feeling physically or feeling emotionally, or sometimes it's smell and taste as well with clairsentience. They'll actually notice the smells that are represented by the person that they're engaged with. And those people are really going from like the solar plexus. So that's a person who's going to have a really, really strong connection with like what we call like body clues and stuff. And that type of person is going to be really, really useful. However, a true clairsentient is still going to interpret that with their own meaning, right? So a clairsentient is not going to, just because that person's stomach hurts, I'm not going to get the story, right? Like, I'm not going to know why necessarily. You know, if I happen to be, and there are people out there who are like clairvoyant and clairsentient and, you know, all the types of, and they're like just this like walking ball of intuition and they have learned how to harness it and understand, you know, yeah, then maybe they can actually like stand there and be like, oh my gosh, your boyfriend just broke up with you and he took your yellow car and he drove away. Like, I suppose there's people that can do that. And that would be sort of bringing this all together. But the clairsentient sort of intuition is more feeling what they're feeling, but you've got to be careful, because if you think that that may be where you sort of orient toward, just be aware that you're still putting your own interpretation on what that means. Then there are clairaudience. So clairaudience are the people who actually, again, you know, we see this all the time in like movies and television where somebody actually gets like, they can hear voices. So literally they're like hearing the thoughts of somebody else, or they're getting the impressions of the memories of somebody else. So this is very much about like picking up this auditory representation. So these are people who are going to hear more than the average person is hearing. So they're likely to be very, very sensitive to tonality, to tone, like all of the really measurable ways that you can actually be sensitive to sound. But they're also going to have their experiences of intuition are going to come to them in this very verbal way. And I know one actually who is a clairaudient, and it is kind of neat, this sort of like parroted experience of what she's getting is very beyond coincidentally accurate to the experience of the person who she sort of tapped into. There's like I said before, if you're trying to sort of figure out this intuitive response to the auditory experience that you're having, because it could be your own, right? Like it could be your own and your own intuition coming from your own experience, right? So all of a sudden you hear your grandfather's voice saying, you know, this guy is not safe to be around. And it's not as though you're, it's not as though that's actually happening, but this intuitive sense of gathering all that information is going to come to you through an auditory way of hearing it. And like I said, it's not going to be critical. It's not going to be a voice that is actually criticizing you, but it could be very, if you're in danger, it could be, and everyone has ability to do this, it could be very, very directive, very urgent. But usually it's going to be a very calming. Intuition is a very, very, very sophisticated thing. It's working through the system, right? It's picking up way more than we ever can consciously. And we all know that we are beings driven toward a positive intention. And so your intuition is going to be more of that. It's going to be less ego, which is the part that causes us to suffer, and more spirit, which is the part that is actually working at a wholeness level, right? And then the fourth one is claircognizance. So claircognizance is this knowing. This is usually experienced like in the heart chakra or the crown chakra. Claircognizance, this is the one that I relate to most, is a weird sense of knowing, and it's an experience of knowing things just slightly before they're about to happen. So knowing what somebody's about to say, or knowing what someone's thinking, but it doesn't come to you in words, it comes to you as a sensation. So the sense of what someone is trying to say will, claircognizant will just sort of know, which can make them very annoying because they'll cut you off because they know. Yes, knowing that they're pregnant. Well, any one of those, Larissa. So here's the thing. Thank you for bringing that up. So somebody who just knows they're pregnant could absolutely be like claircognizant, could be this sense of just knowing. It could be a clairvoyant. It could be somebody who suddenly has an awareness of like, they're seeing a baby, they're seeing the images that are all happening, you know, associated to it. And that tells them intuitively, unconsciously, that they're pregnant. It could be that they're actually hearing a sense, like a voice, like a voice in their own mind that just says, you're pregnant, your body is now developing a fetus. It's growing another life. There's another consciousness inside of you now. It could be a voice that is saying that, or it could be the clairsentience. So it could actually be just this really, really sort of like hyper aware feeling, this intuitive feeling of something, some other being inside of you. So it could be that sense of like somebody knowing something that there is no reasonable, rational way of knowing. Mothers, right? You know, we've all had the experience, all of us, you know, of like just randomly sort of, you know, like that. You know, I've had the experience of being in the hospital with my little one when he was like 6 weeks old, and they had wrapped his foot. They had an intravenous because he had a spike to fever, and they'd wrapped his foot. And he was fine because I had him all, you know, antibiotic out and everything else. And just that sense of like, you have got to unwrap that. You've got to unwrap that. And that like urgency as a mom, and the nurse saying like, why are you saying everything's fine? And I was like, it's not fine. Can you please unwrap the foot? Right. And they unwrap it, and he's going green on his foot because they've put it in wrong. And you know, like we all have those experiences, right? You walk into the room for no reason randomly and your kid has a fever, or whatever the case may be. We all have stories of this, right? And it could come through any of these sort of channels. And some of you may have a lot of really active, like it may be that you've got like, you know, you feel like you both have sort of like you may be clairvoyant and clairsentient, or you may have just sort of one of them. It's very likely that you have one really going on. Whether you have paid attention to it in your life or whether you have trusted it in your life is another story, right? You may have completely dismissed it, or certainly been taught to dismiss it. I mean, we are absolutely taught to dismiss these intuitive, you know, ways of understanding the world or interpreting the world. But here's a way to kind of figure it out. It's very, very, very similar to the VIK, to the way that in NLP we look for what is your dominant. And I don't know, I can't find the research on it. I doubt there is research on it, whether it is actually related, like whether somebody who is clairvoyant, would they always be a V? Would they always be more visually dominant? I don't know. I suspect that there's a high correlation, if not a direct correlation. But the example that Atherton uses is if everyone just listen to this question very simply and notice your very, very first response. If I ask each one of you, do you want an orange? Do you want to eat an orange? Just notice what happens. So did you see the orange? Did you have an experience of what it would smell like and taste like? Did you get an automatic, yes, I do, no, I don't? Or did you just have a sense of knowing, yes, I do, or no, I don't? What was the very first thing that happened for you? Can anyone notice it right away, like, and share what they noticed right away?
So Tara, I saw the orange and then it's like, yes, I want one.
Yeah. You actually heard that.
Yep. Yes, I want one.
You
But
saw
I have a knowing, like I know, I have had 2 instances where in work environment stuff was stolen or was about to be stolen, and I knew who stole it, and then it was found in their possession. And another time where some kids, some punks, it was hilarious, were going to take a hook and steal my purse. And I looked at them and I went, I just knew they were about to do it.
Yeah. Guess who gets into coaching? Claircognizance. I mean, it is going to be, we're going to be like very, very dominant in the coaching field. You're not going to be nearly as attracted to what, like Sue, I don't know, Sue, what do you think you are?
Well, actually, I've been to, have you seen Atherton yourself?
Yeah, I have. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've worked with Atherton a lot, and she has her own views of this because clairvoyant and claircognizant, or how I can't even say the word, but I do, I have the ability to take on people's feelings. So if an injured person comes to see me and I talk about their ankle, I could just be out on the street talking to somebody about their injury. And then all of a sudden I'm limping away and I'm going to see Atherton, who's there to help me through it.
Yeah.
Or I have the ability that when I look at things, or I'll just be wandering around and then all of a sudden time speeds up for a second. Like you know how we do an NLP with the movie?
Yeah.
Well, for me, it goes forward. And this has happened since I was a child. It would speed up and I would see what's going to happen in the next 30 seconds or in a minute.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would say, no, don't think that. And then it would happen.
Yeah.
So she's helped me a huge deal.
Yeah.
Being able to overcome that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll tell you, I've worked with Atherton too. And because this claircognizant thing is so dominant and it's been a real bitch in my life. And I say that like affectionately, really, it really has. It's been problematic because what it does is it makes you come off actually insensitive, because you really, like, I really do feel like I know what is, like, I know before it's done. So it can be really, I can come off really impatient toward the end of things because I'm already there and I want to go anyway. So that's been really interesting. But what I had to learn, with Atherton, of course, is like that knowing can change, right? Just as the vision can change, just as the sound can change. So I wrote in my little thing to entice you all here tonight with, like, how do you know when, like, what if somebody has had a really strong intuition about you and you know that they're actually wrong? Like, I've had people say to me before, like, I just know that you're lying, but I'm not. Like, and I don't think that they're inaccurate in that they're like intuition, whatever that thing is, but because it's so muddled, things can change, right? So because there's always influences and projection going on, I may have this like knowing, I know what this person is feeling right now. They don't know it yet, but I know where they're going, right? So this happens to me. I mean, you guys will relate to this, probably some of you. I know, I would say 4 to 5 times, I know what the next thing in a core transformation, I know exactly what they're going to say, to the point, guys, where I actually have started, I think I've shown you this before. I actually started doing like the adult coloring because I was getting so distracted. And I feel like sometimes I have a fairly powerful like influence and energy, right? And I felt like sometimes I was actually sort of influencing it because of this sort of back and forth that happened. So what I was doing was, like, my clients will be doing a core transformation or timeline or whatever, and I have to color because it keeps all my energy just right here. I'm focused on like the little owl that I'm coloring, and then I'm not influencing what's happening over there. Plus, I'm not getting my own knowing, which of course isn't static, right? It is not static. We know this through quantum. Those of you that have done like quantum healing, there are waves of possibility that are infinite. And what's happened is that we just have picked up one of those waves, the ones that most dominant in this moment. But that can change and often does change because a different choice is made. So you've basically like say like your client's there and like, these are the choices. And essentially what you've done, maybe there's one choice that is like slightly more like vibrant in a certain way than another one, or it has like more energy to it. So you kind of grab onto that one. And that is what your intuition, that's what your like claircognizant, your clairvoyant, thing will actually then pay attention to, because in some capacity in a quantum way, that is going to happen, right? They're all going to happen. You've kind of grabbed onto this one. This was the most likely one. So you're going to be right most of the time. But there is the possibility that a different choice could be made in the next 3 seconds, right? A different something could happen. And one of these other ones can be chosen, which is why you can be wrong. Even though your intuition was like right, like it was firing just like it always does when it's right. But sometimes you're wrong, guaranteed. All of us have.
And, so for me, like when I saw Atherton, I hit that pivotal point when I was at 17, and I kissed my mom goodbye at the door. We were going skiing, and I had time sped up, and I saw that I was going to be in a car accident.
Yeah.
And we drove up, we went skiing, and we skied all day. Didn't think about it at all. And on the way home, I thought, I'm going to ask we took 2 cars out. I'm going to ask my brother if I can go home in that car. It's a safer car. I fell asleep, and sure enough, a drunk driver hit us head on. And that, really messed with my brain.
Yeah.
Because as a child, I was very fearful of always being able to see these things happen. And then I made a choice in that moment to what I thought, it's not going to happen, because I keep to myself, it's not going to happen, it's not going to happen. But it still happened.
Yeah.
Right. And so Atherton, we had to work long and hard on these issues of, those choices of how we interpret that movie spinning forward.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And it can still, very, very interesting.
It's very, very interesting.
He has a nice book though. Do you have a book? Yeah, I know that. Yeah.
This one.
So interesting, Sue. What you're pointing to is sometimes we think if we have this stuff that somehow or another we can control.
That's
so what's beautiful about your not. Sorry, it's not. I mean, I know it was a horrific situation, but the story is that don't be seduced or think that all of a sudden gives you control, right? As opposed to information.
Yes.
Yeah. Well said. In my young life, I was always trying to control things, because I think I was very fearful of seeing these things. Because if you see, I was sitting at an airport and I watched a mother and a child go up the escalator, and the mother had put the kid on the rail. And I saw them come up, and I was like, oh my God, I saw the movie go forward and that kid's going to fall down. Right. And they came off. I was like, oh, thank goodness, nothing happened. They come back up for another ride, and they fall down, the screaming, the crying, the legs going in the escalator. And I'm just like, okay, now I have to get on an airplane.
Yeah.
Really?
So like, I remember once I was driving with a friend, and we were driving home from up north, and we were at the sort of the bottom of a big hill, and we were coming up this hill, and there was like a transport truck coming down the other side. And I had an absolute knowing. It was just one of those things where I'm like, that truck is going to hit us. And it didn't. It just carried on. But it was so strong. I was so absolutely sure of it. I didn't see it. I just knew it. It would have been fine. I would have just been like, oh, that was weird or whatever. But about 10 minutes later, I was talking to the person I was driving with. And I was like, it was really weird. I got this feeling. And he looks at me and he's like, you got that feeling too? It's like, yeah. And he was like, I knew it. He's like, I was absolutely certain that truck was going to hit us. Like, it was just so clear. And both of us agreed that like the truck was not driving weird. It was on its side of the road. Like, there was nothing going on there. And we both just had this like incredibly weird, powerful feeling that it was about to hit us. And we were both wrong. But the fact that we both had that experience and it was so intense tells me that there was something else at play, right? Like in my interpretation, which, you know, we can never really know, but my interpretation of that would be like, there is some parallel thing, or that guy just about did. We picked up that like instant of when it was about to happen, but then he, you know, or she or whatever, like something shifted. And so we picked up what was about to happen. But then of course the universe is not something that is destined. It is
And
not.
maybe that happens like 10% of the time, but
Yeah.
90% of the time, when these thoughts come up, you know, because it's like a vision and a thought, but it's like 10% of the time it might happen, but 90% of the time,
Yeah.
it's just, there's nothing there.
Well,
Right.
so here's, and I don't know if Atherton talks about this, but I know that there's a relationship between the amount of time and how your intuition works. So if you're someone who like what you're describing, Sue, like yours is interesting because it is actually out quite a bit in the future. If you kissed her goodbye and saw the accident like way out in the future, usually somebody whose intuition is really strong sort of in like the moment. So mine is strong in the moment. I don't know what the hell's going to happen tomorrow.
Yeah, it could be like this.
Yeah,
But
then
also
it's
could be-
less likely that you're going to be wrong because things are about to happen sort of now, right? There's less time for the things to change. Whereas somebody who's sitting there and says, you know, I have this sense that I'm going to marry a, you know, tall, dark, handsome prince 20 years from now, like that shit doesn't happen. I'm sorry. Like that shit, like that's I don't know, maybe there was but the world doesn't work. The universe doesn't operate that way. You know what I mean? Like it's so unlikely. It is, of course, there are going to be possibilities like that, but it shifts too much, right? You know, whereas if you meet somebody and you immediately have a sense of some kind of connection or whatever it is, some sort of like, whether it's caution or whether it's draw or whether, you know, whatever it is, that's probably pretty freaking accurate. You know, like there is a relationship between the time of your intuition and how much chance there is for things to pick up on. So people who channel, and I promise I'll get back to coaching in a second. Oh, I just got the coordinated a big rock. And she knew she would. Yeah. So I want to hit on a couple of things. So I just totally lost my train of thought. But there are some people who their own sense, so where this can get skewed and oh no, what I was going to say, I remember. So people who channel, right? So if you go to like somebody who channels, you know, stuff and tells you like your future and guides you and all that kind of stuff, and they're picking up on like ancestors or, you know, whatever, those people who do that kind of stuff, we know for sure that there is like a higher there. If you know, do the math on it, like what are they guessing? What is coincidence? What is just like high sensory acuity? You know, how many of them are actually just like, you know, that show, The Mentalist, that beautiful show, The Mentalist, which really supports the whole idea that there is no magic. There is only, although every once in a while they'd have an episode where like you realize it's magic. But it really supports the idea that like essentially you're just high sensory acuity and like, you know, Mensa IQ together allow you to sort of figure things out that nobody else can. But really what's likely happening is that they're tapped into the energy as the energy is now. So when somebody says like, you're going to get divorced in 2 years, you know, or this man is going to cheat on you, we know about beliefs, right? As coaches, as NLP coaches, this is what we teach. If you have a belief, he's going to cheat on me, he's going to cheat on me. How many of you have heard your clients say, I knew he was going to cheat on me, I just knew it? Oh yeah? When did you decide? Like, how long ago did you decide that he was going to cheat on you? And you're surprised right now that he cheated on you? Like, literally, your belief has been energetically creating everything. And I'm not even talking about the woo-woo stuff. I'm talking about like creates a jealous nature, makes you like question things in a way that probably you don't need to, accuses him of that, you know, all of the behaviors that are going to make somebody feel like you don't trust them. And when somebody's not trusted, they're more likely to do untrustworthy things. And like, you know, the whole sort of cascade of like our beliefs so frequently shape our world. So if you're sitting there with somebody who has a really, really strong intuition in terms of these types of energies, you know, the stuff that you're seeing, the stuff that and says, you know, your husband's going to cheat on you. And 2 years later, your husband does cheat on you and you go back and say, that person told me that this was going to happen. Well, what were they picking up on except for the energy that was there, right? So most of it is likely along those lines. So the idea of like, if you go to see somebody, I think it's really important to take it seriously. I think there are some really, really gifted people who do have the ability in these ways, right? That have a clairvoyance or have a clairaudience or have something where they can pick up sort of vibrationally, symbolically, representative, the stuff that's going on inside of you. They can kind of bring it out for you, and they can showcase it for you. Like, they can show you what's going on. The mistake would be to believe that it's somehow destined, right? Like that it's like, oh, that they told me that my husband's going to cheat on me, therefore he's going to, and there's nothing I can do. Which is like, if someone said to me, your husband's going to cheat on you, I might be well served to be like, okay, all right. So there is an energy right now that is likely to be creating a situation where in time there's going to be mistrust, right? Like that there's going to be. So what might I do if I don't want that to happen? If what I want is to have a relationship that is honest and that is, trustworthy and that is respectful and all that kind of stuff, what can I do to make sure that the energy that I'm creating that's inside of me that I can put into this relationship is going to create that, right? Which makes it just as useful. Like, it's just as useful as going to someone who's going to say like, this is going to happen, So I think that understanding how you as a coach. So the last thing I was going to say was that some people have, so if you imagine this aura, right? So people who are really good at actually paying attention to it. And by the way, everything that I know about this, you do not need to be born one way or the other. Nature, nurture, everything's debatable, but you can certainly develop intuition. I, without a shadow of a doubt, I know that there are people who have been able to really, really, really work at it and develop intuition. And probably the best way to do it is sort of find where your natural intuition is, where it's most easily available to you, and work on that. And then in time, if it continues to interest you, you can probably wander into the different areas of intuition and do work around them. But so say somebody who's clairvoyant, who actually has this ability that they have either nurtured or just have or whatever, where they can sort of pick up like fragments of light in a way where, vibrationally it all makes sense. They can see these auras, even though, just like the infrared, even though we may not be aware of our own auras, we're still looking through them. It's still there. We know it's there. Machines can pick it up. People can pick it up. We know that there is this aura around us, this sort of. And so if you think about it, we just, how when you're looking at a window, you very, very easily forget that there's glass there, right? You're not paying attention to the glass that you're looking through. And yet, if the window was suddenly open, no matter how clear the window was, you would notice there's an additional clarity, right? But you forget the window's there. And I think that you need to remember that you're always kind of looking through your own aura. And so if you're noticing whatever it is, and I would say the same is true for the audience, the same is true for the cognition, like the same is true for all of this. You've got your own filters of this. We don't know as well how to the aura, we have figured out how to actually measure that one and see it. We haven't done that with auditory stuff, right? We haven't figured out how to make the invisible visible. We haven't figured out how to pick voices out of the air. We haven't figured out how to do that. We haven't done it with claircognizant, and we haven't been able to do it with clairsentient. However, I would guarantee at some point we will. It's just as available, right? We'll figure out what is it that causes you to be able to feel the sensation of someone, right? We hear these stories all the time. My father died and I felt his hand on my head. I felt it. Dude down at Ninth Vibration who can make you actually feel. You can put your hand on the table. He'll do this day in and day out, like a little magician. You go, there's a vibration, guys, is a little store in Guelph, although I think it's gone. Is it here? I don't know. Anyway, and there's a guy that does energy work, and anyone who's sort of skeptical of it, he'll just tell you to put your hand on the counter and he'll go like this, and he'll stop his hand, an inch above yours. And within 30 seconds, you are literally feeling a finger hit your hand. And he's nowhere near a hand. And it's wild. It's such a beautiful convincer for people that question this stuff. Anyway, But we don't know how to measure that. We don't know how to get that on a video camera so we can teach it and, you know, all that kind of stuff. So you just want to be mindful that some people probably have pretty clear filters. Some people probably are looking at the world with some pretty clear, you know, glass-like translucent sort of filters. And so their own intuition, what they're picking up, even though it's coming through their own filters, is pretty clean, right? It's pretty accurate to whatever is out there. Other people may have more, you know, stuff in the way. So their own, you know, aura, if they've got a real sort of like, you know, opaque kind of dark, you know, whatever the aura is. And of course, like I said, we don't know about the eyes and the ears and everything else. If that's what's going on, that's where, you know, intuition about the other is still intuition about the other. It does not start from in here. It is not sourced within you. It is you in response to something external to you. So even though intuition, of course, you know, your experience of it is from here, it's got to come in. And so just be aware that sometimes when people's intuition seems to be like so real to them, but inaccurate to your experience, you're probably just getting a filter that they have forgotten that they're looking through that is influencing what's coming back. So this is why it is really, really, really valuable to like meditate, guys, because all of these things, all of these experiences that we can have that kind of teach us how to recognize our own filters allow us to have more clarity or more understanding of what it is that's coming in. So we're not getting sort of a tainted experience of that. Some people project. It's not projection. It's different than projection. It's what it's coming through, right? Simone.
I'm just going to mention that an example of that is I worked over the years with many animal communicators. And if you ask 12 animal communicators the same thing, they're going to filter differently.
Mm-hmm.
And I've learned that over the years. I've had people say to me, "Oh, are you an animal communicator?" I said, "No, I'm an animal listener. I've got high sensory acuity." That's why I refer to it to give it some normalization for a lot of people. I have high sensory acuity for certain things. And I think spending since 2013 with holistic practitioners and wellness practitioners within my business, as well as personally, you know, a lot of the intuition has a lot of validity, and a lot of it is, as we know, is filtered through our past experiences and whether we've been sensitized. There's a great book called What Happened to You by Oprah Winfrey and Dr. Perry, and really talks about that sensitization of the central nervous system. And I think, you know, whether we're born with it and it is subdued, or it is not heightened and then becomes heightened due to an adverse childhood experience or attachment issues and things like that, is really quite profound. And I think there's lots of value to it. I mean, I know that part of the work that I do with my clients is I'm highly tuned into them because of my empathic, if you want that clairsentience piece, and that sense of knowing and having to be patient, because I have the impatience part too. But I grew up having a lot of anxiety with the same thing that Sue did. Is I can see what's going to happen. I can predict what's going to happen, and I can also pick up other people's anxiousness. And so for a long time, I just thought that was mine. And then when I finally understood it a little bit more with the work that I did, I now know that when I pick something up, it's probably somebody else's stuff, and I just have to sort that out. And I don't automatically take it on myself. So my journey has been around emotional regulation, around all this stuff that nobody had languaging for, and I certainly didn't as when I was younger. And it's so wonderful to hear this languaging come out so that we can actually discuss it in a way that makes sense and frames it in a way that we understand it. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, that's really, thank you. Because that's probably so like so relatable to people's experience in terms of like how it can be a gift and how it can be a real curse. Like it can be something that if you were aware of it, there sort of is a period of time before you numb it out or you sort of learn to shut it off, which usually people growing up in a regular world do at some point before they kind of like reclaim it and relearn it. And that experience, of course, of like not knowing if the anxiety is yours or someone else's, once you learn it, like the clairsentients that I know, they don't get confused anymore about whether the anxiety is theirs or somebody else's, because they can notice it as being the other's and it doesn't turn into then their own, which is
And you use it as information. You use it as information versus embodying it, right?
Yeah. But almost always if you're talking about actual intuition, like actual claircognizant, it's going to leave the room when the person leaves the room. It's not going to stay. What will have happened, and probably what happened to, well, not probably, for sure, what would have been happening for you when you were young and, all this kind of stuff is that like it comes into the room with somebody. You have the experience of picking it up, experiencing it. It happens inside of you. The reason it doesn't go away when they walk out of the room is because you're now anxious all by yourself because of the anxiety that you were feeling. It causes you, it then triggers your own anxiety. It's not like their anxiety stays in you. It's that it has caused then your own actual anxiety, right? There isn't such thing as somebody else. I mean, sorry, I'm being very, there are people believe that other people's energy can stay right within you. I don't believe that. From my way of interpreting that very same experience would be that like if somebody else's energy seems to be lingering, it's because you have adopted it as your own, and it has your own response to whatever it is what's causing the suffering, what's causing the grief, is your own response to that, and therefore it is yours, which is really, really, really good news, guys, because that means that by your own then power, you can release it and get rid of it. If it was somebody else's shit hanging around, that would suck because it wouldn't allow you as much ability to let go of it, right? So it's really, really, yeah, there's a reason you can relate and keep it as your own response. Yeah, of course, right? So you're going to have your own response to it. So whatever it is, right? Like if I walk in the room with someone who's evil, and I'm sure you guys have too, right? Like I've noticed that sense of like being with somebody. And again, for me, it doesn't hit me in my stomach. I don't feel your feels are all your feels, but I do get a knowing. I do get like I've been in the room with what I would say was sort of like an evil, which of course my compassionate heart says that like they were just hurt and everything else. But however, they're currently in their current experience, they are now an evilly intentioned person. And that sense of knowing what they're thinking, like knowing that they are looking to take advantage of, that they are looking to cause hurt, when you suddenly become aware of that, is scary as crap, right? And you're going to have a response to it. And that response is very likely to be like a feeling of, why can't I get rid of this? So they're long gone then, and you're still spooked 3 days later, feeling like that energy is still inside of me. But of course, it's not their energy. Their energy is long gone. You're revisiting, right? Like you're having your own response and reaction to that energy. And that's what's getting stuck in there. Yeah, you feel it viscerally, right? And for me, it would always swing up here. Like it just swings around here. I get this, like it will not leave me. Like I want a lobotomy, right? I want to, when stuff like that was happening to me where I couldn't get rid of it, it wouldn't, we all experience it probably more dominantly in different places. So, okay. So just in the very, very last 10 minutes here, I just want to bring this back to coaching. So how does this help us? So why am I talking about this? How does it help us as coaches? What can we do with all of this knowledge? So I think one thing is to recognize that, like I said at the beginning, like your job is kind of to teach your clients how to get more connected with their own intuition. Because most, we say this, probably, you sound like a bit of a broken record when you say to your clients, your conscious mind is 5% of your experience and your unconscious is 95% of your experience. Therefore, blah, 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 blah. We don't, cure things or resolve things by the narrative or the story. We go beneath that. So essentially, we're already doing this. And what we want to be teaching our clients is you've got to trust the stuff that you don't know how to put words to, that you don't know how to put reason to. All the stuff that amounts to intuition, we're kind of saying to our client, you've got the ability to sort that out. And so to be able to have a sense of your own intuition, the more that you can hone in on how to distinctively notice like what is ego and what is not ego, what is intuition, what is likely to be you picking up on the external stuff outside of you that's coming in that you don't have, rational ways to explain. And how clouded are you in responding to that? And that the more that you can work on yourself, the more likely you're going to, first of all, have a clear input from your client. And second of all, you're likely to be able to guide them to be able to make that distinction, right? We talked last week about the self, right? And trying to actually support the person in being like more capable and expert in their self, in their beingness, so that they don't have to control the outside world so much. This is very, very, very similar. It's very similar to like guiding them in. And then in terms of the different intuitions, it drives me crazy. I always, present a pet peeve at every one of these talks. My pet peeve is acting like intuition is the same, that it's a common shared experience, that we all have intuition. And it's too bad, because I think it makes people really dismiss their own intuition when it doesn't match the experience of the person who's like more knowledgeable about intuition, but like their intuition may be, clairsentient, and the other person's intuition is clairvoyant, and then it gets dismissed, this whole, like, the people who see it are somehow more intuitive than the people who just know it, right? Like, so there's this, it's much like the Enneagram or the Myers-Briggs, like where we, just because there's a heart-centered person, who's trying to drive the head-centered person into their model of like, this is the most evolved way of being, when they're dismissive of the fact that it is very different for them. And so I think there's a real value here in like really paying attention to your client and how are they getting the senses that they are most willing, most easily going to trust are very likely to be different from your own. Right. So let's do a little exercise. And this is one that I would highly, highly suggest that you can bring in. There's no script to this. You will get it within 2 seconds of me doing it. But it's one that's so simple and so useful for your client. Okay. So I want everyone just to take a second. We'll just literally do this for 2 or 3 minutes tops. Okay, so I want everyone to just close their eyes, if you can, if you don't have children all around you. Just close your eyes. And I want you to bring to mind an experience that is absolutely, in your experience, truth. So I want you to say something to yourself that is absolute truth. So I'm going to say to myself, don't make this sophisticated, guys. Don't be clever. Just be simple here. So I'm going to say to myself right now, I am sitting in this chair. I am sitting in this chair. So say something very simple and similar like that to yourself. And I want you to notice everything, okay? Go through with your eyes closed. What are you seeing? What do you hear when you say this to yourself? What does the voice sound like? What does it feel like? And what is that sense of knowing? And now I want you to say to yourself something that is absolutely not true. So I'm going to say, in a few minutes, I could be sitting on a camel. And I'm going to notice right now what that visual looks like, what it sounds like. Feels like, and the knowing. Now I want you to say something that you're not sure about. Okay, I'd like you to say something inside your head. So I'm going to say, I'm not sure if I should start writing a book right now or if I should wait a year, 18 months before I begin. And as I make that statement to myself, the uncertainty of that, it is true that I honestly don't know. I don't know if the timing would be better now or if I wait 18 months. I'm not sure. And I want to notice what I see. Notice what I hear. Notice what I feel. And pay attention to what I know. So guys, I'm not going to start writing a book right now. That's pretty clear. Here, we're going to do two more. I want you to think about somebody who you absolutely know their heart. Okay, specifically their heart. So I am going to say to myself, my daughter, my little 9-year-old little munchkin, has this big, giant, bleeding heart for animals, well, for everyone. And I know that to be true. And I'm going to notice what I see, what I hear, what I feel, and what I know. And now, in an act of vulnerability, I'm going to say to myself something about somebody else that I don't really know. So my son had a pretty shitty baseball game this weekend, like super shitty. And I really genuinely don't know how he feels. I don't know if he's okay or not right now. I don't know if his ego's been really hit hard or whether he for real is just like bouncing back. And I don't know. And so I want to check right now. What do I see? What do I hear? What do I feel? What do I know? And I want you to do that last one again. Whatever you chose as that last one, the one that you really genuinely don't know, I want you to do it again. This time, I want you to notice what you hope for the other person. So does this make sense to you? I want you to actually this time, rather than sort of tuning into just your response, your intuition about it, I want you to put the layer of like what you're kind of hoping. And now notice with that added element of what you're hoping for them, how does that change what you see? What you hear? What you feel? What you know? Okay. So just open your eyes and come back. So I'll tell you what I got. I got a very, for me, that was very different. That last one of like my son's like just tapping into the fourth, Larissa, is what you know, what you see, what you hear, what you feel.
No, before you did someone else that doesn't really know. So
Oh,
that you, the fourth like step.
oh,
Is an absolute truth not true, something that's unsure? What was
Yeah.
the
And that's unsure. And then I said somebody that you know, like where you know, absolutely know this about them to be true. So I thought about my daughter, like my daughter and her big bleeding heart for animals. And then I did somebody in a situation where you don't know for sure how they feel or what they're, and then that layer of hope on top of it. So what shifted for me so much, the visual didn't, I can't access much visual at all for anything. So that wasn't very different. The, what I hear was actually not very different. But when I got to the, like, what do you feel? It was actually, it was less. So I was sort of feeling this sense of disappointment. And then when I was hoping that he was okay, it certainly felt less. But what was really interesting was the knowing. And the first time what I got was, he's okay. The second time when I added that layer of hope, what I got was, you can really help him be okay. You can influence this. So, does somebody else want to share before we talk with this? I would love to hear if anyone else had anything notable that they're willing to share. First of all, did everyone experience something interesting there? Yeah. Okay. Simone.
For me, it's like priming co-regulation.
Explain more.
So by envisioning what you see for them in the future, like what you want them to be, you are priming, number one, yourself to regulate on that intention, right? And we are always co-regulating with the people around us.
Yes.
Unless you can control your own co-regulation and you're very aware of it.
Yeah.
And so just by setting that intention, you start to co-regulate your anybody around you, or any conversations or any responses, and even the feelings you have, that kids are so tuned in. So I think of your son, right? And it's like, if you've got this vision, your energy or your emotional, the emotional integrity that you are in holding that space, and your regulation around that allows him to co-regulate with you. And that intention of you doing that will create and manifest.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. And also I would say that like my takeaway from that is like, my hope is what I want to get out of the way. My intuition is what I want to listen to. So my takeaway from my own experience there is like, Tara, he's fine. What I would like is to have this sense of like, I need to go nurture. I need to go help. I need to go influence. But I think that's just me. Like, I think that's like, that's what if I let myself just because I'm in a deep place, like, right. Like I would probably argue with Alan if I was like, no, he needs, we need to talk to him about this. We need to make sure like, and I would probably argue that I'm really tapped into my intuition there. But when I actually take the time to separate it, the truth is, I think he's fine. Like, I think it was just a bad baseball game. I think he's fine. Right. It's me so it's very interesting that sometimes it works. So as a coach, I think that is actually very much in line with what you're saying. Right. And I think you're right, Simone. It's still, so I think as a coach, what we just need to be careful of sometimes is I need to back off my intention a lot. Right. So there's this conflicting sense of like, yes, we need to hold space for our clients and make sure that we're always like, when we look at our clients, we want to see the best for them. We also, though, have to be very careful that we don't know what the best for them is. Right. Like, so I want to be careful that my own sort of imposition of like where I want to lead them, I can, we can do it well sometimes just by being like chunk way up. I want them to be at peace, I want them to be well, whatever it is. So we can get out of the weeds and we can get up to like a high intention that probably does fit for everyone. But that often for me doesn't happen. Like often I'm sitting with my client and what I'm noticing is that I'm hoping she's going to leave the motherfucker. Oh, sorry. Or I'm sitting there wishing that like, go for the job, go for the bot, right? Like, or don't wait, like, just tell her how you feel, right? Like I'm having this experience of like, and I think that is really, because it feels I've had to learn with my intuition. I don't know, Sue, your experience of Atherton Drempf. She is one of the coldest people I've ever met. She's like warm, loving, all this kind of stuff, but also she has this like really cold nature. And I know a lot of people who've gone to her have had this experience of like, but what's happening, I think, there is that she's just like, what to me sometimes as a coach feels a little like, I'm supposed to be really warm and want all this stuff or whatever. But if I need my intuition to guide me, I actually have to back off. I got to get a little bit more objective, right? Like I've got to stop like throwing all of my stuff all over the experience. And I've got to get back out a little bit and say, okay, Tara, wait, like, how is this person? Not how do I want them to be? How is this person? And I will go back, Simone, for sure. Like to your point, like I will go back then, of course, and set my intention for whatever. But it's just, I think it's really, really important to be aware of all this, Catherine.
So thank you for that, because when we talked about what I wasn't sure about for the person that I cared about, and the imagery I get when I'm not sure, it's gray, it's sort of cloudy. And then what I hoped, all of a sudden, color comes in. So I'm coloring the picture.
Yeah, right.
So what just through this conversation is
like, you little Enneagram 7. All the 7 and 8s are awful for this.
I know. I got my crayons out and I'm coloring everything, and it's bright and it's cheerful.
Yeah. Yeah. Which has its uses. Just don't confuse it with intuition.
Right. And that's what this really helped me to understand is that may be what I'm hoping for them, because it is.
Right.
But that may not be where the direction we need to go.
Right. Right. Exactly. So, yeah, in a million ways, yes, we have to sort of, I think, get just really, really in tune with what our intention is. And if we have a high level of sort of like intuition, where are we going to use it raw? And where are we going to bring in that intentional sense of like trying to sort of help manifest and hold space and create beliefs that are going to be, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Simone.
So one of the things our groups are talking about right now is around ethics.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ran an equine therapy program for 16 years. And one of the things that we needed to do with the horses, it was therapy for the horses, not for the people.
Right.
And it's not be attached to the outcomes. Can you stay neutral?
Mm-hmm.
And that takes practice. And around the ethics piece, to me, this is an ethics about not interfering with the client process as well. And so how do you find that balance between you being able to see, feel, sense, know, and coaching your client along the process? And, I think it's a gray area for a lot of people. And I think you can definitely interfere with their process, and that's not necessarily their highest and best.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to I think that's why it's important to do our own work so that we can clear our own stuff so it doesn't interfere with our clients.
Yeah.
But not being attached to the outcome, holding the best possible, optimum situation, holding space for that, but not being attached to it is a fine line for some people.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think you can't let, like, in terms of intuition, if you can get somebody, so this, where you want your client to get to is a deep sense of self-trust, right? So you want them first to be trustworthy, which means you got to make sure that you're doing all the work to make sure your client is as, strong and capable as they can be. And then you want them to know themselves, like be able to go in and experience themselves trustworthy. But what's really important is that when they go in and trust themselves, to recognize that intuition, right? Like intuition is giving them a limited sort of amount of information in terms of making a decision. And so if somebody for example, if somebody is like, I've got somebody who doesn't know the difference between what is fear that I'm creating that is based on the conditions of my past, and what is like a really strong intuition that this is a dangerous situation, right? So now if I'm working with a woman who has that going on, it's really important for me that I help her first like disconnect, like release and let go and deal with trauma and all that kind of stuff, because I would be very, very, very irresponsible if I was going to go in and get her to trust herself when I know that that intuition is so clouded. It honestly, her own intuition is likely to throw her off. And so what we've got to do first is make sure that it's her own sort of like stuff is going to be trustworthy enough that when she's listening to her intuition, that she can actually get there. So it's, again, I think irresponsible to say to somebody who has a whole lot going on, you should just go in and listen to your intuition, because how in the fuck are they going to do that? I mean, honestly, how are they going to do that? And so learning the difference. So that's where I would say, like, you know, with somebody who has, say, a lot of like trauma, or who has a deep history of like, they did listen to themselves and they got hurt. You know, they did think they knew, they were in love, they did, you know, like, and they got hurt, or it led to a bad outcome, or, you know, whatever the case is, to go take them out of those situations, bring them into these really simple experiences of like, you're sitting in the chair. Imagine yourself sitting on a roller coaster, right? Like really, really, really distinctly sort of creating what is imagined and what is currently real. And where do you feel it? Like, where is your experience of that? And see if you can't help them identify, like, what's the one to listen to? Are they more, is it the pictures that are strongest for them? Is it the, you know, whatever it is? And then over time, you can start to recognize like that sense you get when somebody starts flattering you. And you get a sense of like, oh, I like being in the company of this person who's really nice to me. And this feels nicer than this friend of mine who keeps being like, you know, pragmatic and honest and not nearly as flattering to me, you know, and isn't like, but I like being in the presence that, you know. And so if you're helping her to get a sense of like, okay, now go to your intuition then. So, you know, this person makes you feel good, this person doesn't, but, right, there's this idea that like intuition is going to always lead us positive, good feeling things, which is a, you know, crock of shit, obviously. Find your intuition, right? Where does it resonate? This is where you want to go to, like, where does it resonate with your own experience of truth? And can you find it? Can somehow, when that guy tells you you're beautiful and you're, you know, make it whatever, can you notice that as being somehow different than when your friend says like, hey man, you know, you're good looking, but you're not what he says you are. You know, like him making you out to be the most beautiful woman in the entire planet, you know, yeah, you got some nice hair on you and you got a pretty face, but right, like this doesn't feel as good. But what is your intuition? Can you help them go inside and find that experience, and then actually start to use that as, because eventually what you want is that to be the calibration, not what feels good and what doesn't feel good. Right. So again, this could come more easily in pictures. Like I see, you know, this and I see this. It could come as like, I don't know, I just get this sense, you know, you're right. This guy is, you know, truth is he's probably said that to 14 other girls when he wants to, whatever, right? Manipulate. That comes as a knowing. Or like I hear the voice in my head being like, that's bullshit, isn't it? Right?
Your bullshit meter.
Yeah, it is your bullshit meter. And again, you want to make sure that your bullshit meter is really yours.
Yeah.
It's not what other people have told you it's supposed to be or what their experience of it is. Right. And with your kids, right? Like with your kid and with your clients, with your clients, right? I struggle quite a bit with the clients that say to me like, yeah, it's better. I feel better. Okay. You know, when are your clients pleasing you? And when are your clients really having, you know, like all of that kind of stuff that as a coach, where you get really, really, really good is knowing what to listen to, right? Where is that my own lack of confidence that's saying like, this can't really be true. Bye, Sue. And where is it that you're actually getting like read? on what's going on. So again, the simpler the exercise, right? The more that you can sort of do meditations, the more you can just keep feeling yourself out with like, what is it that is actually true in contrast to the stuff that I realize can sometimes feel good or feel true or feel all those things, but isn't, right? Yeah. Huh. What else have we got out there? Should I turn the recording off? I'll turn the recording off.